This conference will now be recorded.
I'm going to call the August 28th, 2023 meeting to order. All are present. Everybody please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move to approve agenda.
I have a motion by Lauren and a second by Janda to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Move to approve consent agenda items.
I have a motion by Lauren and a second by Jason to approve the consent agenda items. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We'll do the Richland audit report whenever you're ready.
Where do you want me?
Right.
What do you want?
No, it's new. Put you on the spot this time.
That's all right.
We put it there for you.
It's a hot seat without a seat.
This is good, I like it. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. My name is Lane with Algo. I've presented here in the past. So what we're gonna go through is our audit presentation. So we put together a high-level summary. You know, something we've been through this before. So again, we're gonna focus on different trends. High-level analysis, we're not gonna go through line by line of the audit report. We really wanna focus it, keeping it as lame as possible, focus on our audit opinion. We'll go through your general fund, your other governmental funds, your enterprise funds, some key performance indicators, and give you a chance to answer any questions. So that's kind of our set agenda. Tony, if you have anything to add along the way, feel free to. So the first thing that we're going to go through is our required communication and our audit results, and what the objective of financial statement audit is, and what your responsibility is as council as part of governance. So really, financial statement audit, we are is you're engaged, really look at numbers and make sure that they're from error, or what auditing standards call material misstatements. So it's our responsibility to opine on those that they are free from significant errors. We provide reasonable assurance that they are reasonably stated. So really what that means is that we can't look at every single transaction that the city enters into. We're really looking at using our judgment, using various sampling and that sort of thing. So our objective is to provide an opinion that they are free from those material statements, ultimate financial statements, go back to council, start with governance through acceptance of the audit report. So with that, our opinion, we have a qualified opinion. So that's the same opinion that you have in the past. The only reason why that opinion is qualified or is not unmodified opinion is because the Fire Leave Association doesn't pay for the GASB 87 actuary, or the GASB 67 actuarial report, which is just additional cost to them to put that in the financial statement. So it's really a cost benefit thing. The state still accepts it, so there's no issue related to that. We're also required to look at other areas of legal compliance at the state level. We do have one instance of non-compliance report, which we'll go to on the next slide. Any questions on any of those? Okay. So our 2022 audit findings that we have, the first three are internal control findings, limited segregation of duties, preparation of financial statements, and material audit adjustments. So those are very common in a city of your size, basically saying that Tony being involved in various aspects of the administration and of the accounting side of things, we need to put that in there and saying that in a perfect control environment, there's really going to be segregation of duties, overlapping those controls and checks and balances. Again, from a cost benefit standpoint, the city opts to accept that risk. So it's just important to know that as you go through financial reports at the city council meeting, it's important to look into those into a little bit more detail. Preparation of financial statements is the same as us as auditors come in and help put together the 100-page audit report. It's kind of an independent thing from our purposes, and material audit adjustments so that we help reconcile some things at the end of the year. Reclass balances where they need to be in accordance with financial reporting and generally accepted accounting principles. The last four, I guess, that we have, sales tax remittances. I know that Tony's been working on getting those caught up. and getting those in the right place. So with the turnover in the administration and the staff, I would say that's where the kind of the 3 through 6 come in. The sales tax commitments is the compensated absences accrual and timely bank reconciliation is really just the nature of the turnover in that function. So the compensated absences accruals, I know there was a change in software, right? Kind of that went through that. So that's one thing that we found with that and got that remedied. Timely bank reconciliations is just the importance of that is getting that information timely and reported at a monthly level. The Fire Relief Association aid, really what that says is that since the city is receiving that, the state wants you to pay that to within the fire relief within 30 days after receiving it in. So kind of a one-off thing there, but those are the findings that we have for 22.
How much money is that?
$27,000.
Not per month, for the year?
It wasn't quite that much, but, you know, I don't even know if it was that. It wasn't that one. It was the little one. It was like
supplementary aid.
It was a supplementary aid one of like $2,300 that
Oh,
the state is really awesome about telling you what they're depositing money for. And
okay.
I'm being very facetious when I say that.
Oh, okay.
It takes quite a bit of time to go through and actually find out what the invoices for, what was paid for. And I'm assuming that came in prior to me taking over, and that's where that discrepancy happened. So now we know that if it says fire relief aid or fire aid or anything like that, the check gets cut immediately to the relief association. That's all.
There can be 2 or 3 different aids that come in regularly. You have some supplementary, and then there's some other benefit aids that come in too. So,
Okay,
but
thank you.
that's one thing that we have. So, like I said, same 3 findings, the first 3 from the previous years. There were some other findings in 21 that got corrected.
All right.
Good.
And one other thing that we have is audit recommendations with the turnover that there has been. The more internal control documentation developed for policies and procedures, employee responsibilities, that's going to help ease that a little bit on who's been doing what. And that's going to help if there's that rare instance of people taking over, you kind of a go-to place to look at for who's some of those processes and validations, those sorts of things. Okay. Any questions on that before we move into some of the financial information? All right. So the first thing we're going to look at is your general fund. That's your main operating fund of the city. So really what we're going to do is compare the orange line to the yellow. So really what that's going to be doing is comparing your liquidity or also your unassigned fund balance. Those are dollars that are available for spending at the city's discretion and compare it to the percentage of your budgeted expenditures. So you can see the general increase in the budget in the yellow. So it's about $933,000 in 2019. That is up to a little over $1.2 million in 2023. So really kind of what you want to see is that orange line fluctuate at the same rate as the yellow. So in 2018 and 2019, you're right around that 50%, 60% that has dropped over the past couple of years for a few reasons, which we'll get to in the next slide. But your fund balance policy does call for 50% of your of reserves as a percentage of the budget. We as auditors, the League of Minnesota Cities also recommends anywhere from 35 to 50%. So if you're looking at that orange graph here, a little bit below where your fund balance policy would call for, but you're still in line with the recommendations of the state and our professional judgment as auditors as well. So really what that does is just allow the additional flexibility with timing of cash flows, since the main revenue sources that you do get are from the taxes and the LGA, which comes in twice a year. So if we look at 2022 a little bit more specifically, what we're going to look at is that net change in fund balances line. So if that was 0, that'd be considered a balanced budget. So yeah, it did have a little bit of an increase anticipated during 2022, but for more or less it was balanced, about 1.1 million both revenues and expenditures. So revenues came in a little bit higher than budget. A lot of that is related to some of the ambulance charges. So that's about $25,000 higher than expected. So with that, with the additional ambulance charges, there's additional runs on operating costs related to that. So expenditures were higher by about $35,000 as well. So if you look at the expenditure line, there's about $1.1 million anticipated actual expenditures, and it'd be about 1.2. So about $92,000 or $93,000 in negative expenditure variance there. So about a third of that was related to some of the ambulance costs. There's also some one-time capital costs during the year, some roofing, some other equipment purchases that the general fund did make related to that. So that ended up being about 2/3 of that $92,000, and there were some other various functions that ended up being over budget as well. But if you look at the net change in fund balances overall, about $72,000 decrease. We did have a prior period adjustment related to some expenditures that ended up being recorded twice in 2021, so we fixed that to get that total fund balance to $861,000 at the end of the year. We started the year at that 890. So if we look back at that previous slide, it did increase a couple of percentage points. The main reasoning is for kind of drilling down a little bit more in 2022 there. Tony, anything else you want to add on that?
No.
Okay. Next, I spent a whole lot of time on our general fund revenues. You can see that they did have a little bit of a decrease in tax revenue during the year. Really that what was done there was just reallocated to the debt service funds to make the debt service payments more so, not so much the operational side of things from the levy in the general fund. And then your other main revenue source, again, is going to be the intergovernmental aid, your LGA, that you get there is going to make up the vast majority of every dollar that the general fund does collect. You can see the outlier 2020 was related to that COVID aid, the CARES aid that came in, kind of that one-off thing. And as we mentioned earlier, your ambulance charges were up in 2022 as well. Okay.
So may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Public safety, so that's fire department, police department, and ambulance.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and there might be some other small costs like civil defense. Sometimes it's captured in there, gift sirens, things like
Okay.
that. But the vast majority is going to be police, fire, and ambulance. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So same things on the expenditure side. You know, a lot of these are going to be inflationary in nature. You kind of have those one-off costs in 2021 in general government. That was really, again, that turnover in the administrative function, additional costs related to that. And then kind of the fluctuation with the public safety, mainly the ambulance costs from 2020 to 2022, depending on the needs of that. And then streets and highways were up a little bit in 2022 as well. And they do some additional, some overlays, those sorts of costs kind of one-off maintenance items. Okay. Any questions on the general fund? The city also has 3 special revenue funds. So these are dollars that are specifically set aside for a specific purpose. So you have your TIF district, your TIF 1-1, that does collect about $27,000 a year in an increment to help make the bond payment related to that. You also have the rural fire fund, which is your operating fund specifically related to those fire operations. That has about $237,000 in the fire fund. You also have $114,000 left in ARPA dollars to spend. The way the accounting works, it doesn't show up in fund balance because it's not captured until it is actually spent on a specific purpose.
Is there a deadline on them?
2024, maybe around 24, like December.
We'll get through it.
I was just asking.
Sure we will.
Yeah. So you got
We better.
I can't believe we haven't already.
That's where that study's coming out of, unless we get a grant for it.
Okay.
Right.
So you see that, and there's a little bit of a deficit in the TIF, and really, again, once mentioned, as that increment does get collected year over year through the property tax remittances, that will decrease like it did in 2022. Okay. You also have 2 capital project funds. You have one minimal fund with the Oddfellows building that doesn't have very minimal activity in there. You also have a capital improvement fund. So you can see that there has been reserves being built in that fund over the past 3 years. So it ended up being about $600,000 in 2020. It did increase about $100,000 each year. This is about $700,000 in that fund in 2022. And really what that's being financed by is by tax levy. So about $117,000 in tax levy going into there. And then you also, one-time thing in 2022 was that $75,000 donation from the fire. So that's captured in there as well. So that's really being used for kind of those one-time costs. Street overlays, if you have any major equipment purchases, could be used towards that. But it's that revolving capital fund basically saying that these dollars earmarked internally for these specific one-time purchases that you don't necessarily have to fund for. Okay. And the last of your governmental funds is your debt service fund. So you have 3 outstanding bonds being paid by assessments and by tax levy. So you have about $386,000 in cash and assessments in these funds compared to about $1 million in debt left outstanding. So annual debt service obligations end up being about $200,000 a year. You do have some debt dropping off in 2024 and 2026, which will help with cash flow. So once those do mature, that's going to save you about $75,000 a year. And then the last bond drops off in 2029. So obviously it doesn't take into consideration any future debt that you might issue, but that is the debt that you have outstanding at year 2022. Okay. Any questions on the operating funds?
Is the interest rate on each one of these the same? I mean, $112,000 in interest is a lot of money.
It's not the same. So it varies just depending on the year that it's issued.
Okay.
So there were some that were refunded. It kind of depends on when the call date is and when those bonds can be refunded. So it will vary, just depending on your bond rating, what the market rate is, depending on when the issuance was made. So there's a wide variety of factors when they do rate it.
Do we have a good bond rating? What's our
We
bond
went
rating?
down a little bit because of the care center and a few other things with the TIF district.
Okay.
We went from a plus to a minus, I think. Can't remember exactly.
Okay.
But, so it's probably not a good time to refund.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, usually the bond people, we usually work with Northland Securities a lot. They're really good about calling and saying, hey, we'd like to refund this bond.
Okay,
And they'll let us know when it's a good time.
good.
To do that. So,
All right.
Not a lot of bond refunding going on right
yeah, not a good
now.
time.
No.
Unfortunately for us.
Yes. Okay. So the last of your funds are gonna be your enterprise funds. So these operate a little bit differently than your governmental funds. So there's not gonna be any tax levy. We don't want to see any tax levy going into it. You really want your user charges, your base charges to pay for both the operating disbursements and the debt payments. So the first one we're gonna look at is your water fund. If you look at the top graph, we really want the orange to exceed the yellow and the black. So really what that's meaning is you're operating a positive cash flow to cover both the operations and those debt payments. So for the most part, you can see that you have broke even, with the exception of 2021. There was some, I think some maintenance costs. I don't know if there was a water main break or what ended up being in 2021. I don't recall off the top of my head. But outside of that, your cash and your water fund has broke even. And you can see what the impact of that is in that bottom graph there. So typically you've been right around that $100,000 in cash in the water fund, with the exception of 2021 that did drop a little bit. It did recover a little bit in 2022. So we as auditors recommend about 35% of your operating costs as a percentage of that cash balance plus your debt payments. So typically we would recommend right around $175,000. You did see that drop to $100,000 in 2022. You did have the 2003 PFA bond mature during the year. So that did save you about will save you about $65,000 a year in cash flow for not having to make that payment out of the water fund. So you're more or less right in line with where our recommendation is for the water fund in 2020. The sewer fund, you can see that's kind of going the other way. So again, looking at that top graph, we want to see the orange exceed the yellow and the black, where that has not been happening over the past few years, and you can see what the impact is on those cash balances. So in 2019, you have about $180,000 in cash. That has dropped to a deficit of about $47,000 in 2020. So I believe there is some debt dropping off in that fund, not next year, but maybe in the future that will help with that a little bit. But at the moment, you can see what the impact is of those increase in the costs and those debt service payments as a comparison to your cash collections in that time.
We should see significant change in that fund in the next cycle due to the increases that we made to that funding, and then also those capital funding sources that we made.
But I think some of that might show the generator on there because we got stuck buying that.
Yeah, so that's true. That $80,000 generator purchase that was unexpected came out of that fund, so that was a good chunk of that.
Yeah, so one way to think about this too is if you look at 2019, if any of that orange above that black line, those would be dollars that are available for those one-time, kind of one-off purchases that you would have, those capital. Anything below that would be saved for your operating side of things. And as I mentioned, as you do purchase that, would certainly draw that and back that for. So the more you can grow and kind of build those out and anticipate those costs as much as you can in the future, that will allow you more of that rate stabilization, not have to make a significant jumps and kind of smooth that out a little bit. Okay. Cedar Point, that's another one of your operating funds. It doesn't have any debt or very minimal debt, minus some interfund debt, but for the most part, it's just operations. And you can kind of see where the cash balances have been at on about $60,000 to $70,000. There were some one-offs in 2020 drops a little bit, but overall, to your point, operates also cash flow. And as Tony mentioned earlier, the nursing home is brought into the city report, so I'm not going to spend any time on this. It's audited by another firm. The way that it's structured, it is brought into the city financial statements. For us to issue our reports, that to be done. Which, done now. So if we combine everything that we looked at and look at all your funds as a whole, the city's been basically at the same point in cash for the past 3 years, right about that $2.6 million. So again, there's a difference, there's a different kind of makeup of that, as we've seen that the capital funds have been starting to build reserves, where the enterprise funds, specifically the sewer, kind of lost cash a little bit. But overall, right about $2.6 million, pretty steady over those past 3 years. Any questions on that?
I see you got EDA on the end there. I don't see anything as far as on the chart for EDA.
So the EDA is going to be a little bit differently because it's a discrete component unit and the way that's reported on. So we don't spend a whole lot of time on the EDA just because of the way that's structured. We do capture it as part of the cash and investments graph, but we don't really specifically point out anything outside of it. I don't know if there's, I know there's some loans made out of there maybe, but
There's usually not much activity, maybe a grant here or there, some transfers in and out, but that's,
Yeah.
we don't levy for EDA money and we don't really, so it's just kind of part of the statement.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's mainly cash collections and then any loans made that might be used for economic development.
Can we talk about that in the budget meeting?
What?
Talk about that in
Yeah,
the budget meeting?
yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions on that? All right. So last thing we have, we mentioned some key performance indicators. So what we'll do is compare you to other class 5 cities. So those are cities under 2,500 in population in the state. So that's going to be the orange. And then other cities in Waseca County, which is going to be the yellow. So one thing I do like to point out is you kind of look at the trends and the differences between other cities your size and other cities in your area. So if you look at your tax rate overall, even if there has been an increase in tax levy, your tax rate has been right around that 115% over the past 4 years. So that's been pretty steady. You can see where you're at with other cities your size and other cities throughout the area. The fluctuation has been pretty similar, basically steady overall. You might be a little bit higher on the higher end of the tax rate. Taxes per capita overall, if you look at the right graph, you're pretty much right in line. But every city is different too. They offer different amenities and have different functions going on too. So it, again, I kind of like to point out the trend and see how you're trending versus your peers.
What's the difference between, you say class 5 cities?
Yep.
What's the difference between cities in Waseca County? Could some of them be class 5 cities also?
Some of them probably are, but like the city of Waseca would be higher than that. So class 5 cities being anything under 2,500 in population, class 4 is anything under 10,000, class 3 is anything
Oh,
under
it's
10
just,
to 25.
it's just related to population.
It's just related to population. Yep. And that's,
Probably Janesville.
Janesville will be the only one.
Probably Janesville. Be it.
They're right on that.
Are they on the board? Okay.
and so obviously the bigger that your city is, you have more tax base to pull from. So that's an impact too, and that's kind of why we want to compare both. Okay. Other questions on that? Long-term debt, we already mentioned that, you have some debt that's been dropping off. You can see that indication there, so I don't really have a whole lot else to point out there. And I think our last slide that we have is your current and your capital expenditures per capita. So, same thing as we noticed that those tax levies have been going up in the general fund a lot. That is to pay increase in costs for operations. And that's where that left graph is. A lot of it is going to be inflationary pressures increasing some of those. And then your capital expenditures too, kind of your one-off things. Really nothing out of line there. You're pretty comparative in both, mainly the operations and the capital. It's kind of been varying that every other year.
I see in your previous slides that you don't have any data on the 2022.
So the 2022, so what we do when we get all this data is that we do a data request from the state auditor's office. So in order to get all that information, they need to have all the financial statements. So we usually get 2022 data in like February of 23. And then we can filter it and massage it however we want to do to compile all that. So that's why it's going to be NAs, because we're always a year behind. So you don't have access to all the 2022 audits.
What kind of stuff? Thanks.
And with that, that is all I had to go through. Again, wanted to keep it high level as possible. If there are any other questions or anything else, Tony, that you want to point out?
I don't think so.
Questions from you?
Thanks, Lane.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you have anything, my contact information is there. I'd be happy to answer anything as it comes up.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
No?
Yeah, well, no, because I don't have the full report here. Let's put it on. We'll accept it the next.
Okay.
Public hearings since Larry's not here.
And at this point, I'm gonna open up the public hearing for THC public consumption of ordinance. And we're gonna move down to resolution 23-15.
I'd like to speak at for the public hearing,
Go ahead.
if I may.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Love to hear from you.
Yeah, I bet you would. For the record, my name is Jody Winmer. I live at 321 3rd Street Northwest here in North. Fulfill campaign promises. I'm really amazed that the legislature, that listen to medical opinions